work with you about, Scott Scrogin. And I've been told Strategic Initiatives Director at Strategic Initiatives is the title, but I could have that horribly wrong.
You have it correct.
Yes, nailed it. Strong start. All right, cool. So over the 2 days here at IT Nation, we've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and I think some of them we're going to piece up as some short form content. Maybe we'll cut some up to sort of align by message. I think this conversation with you, I'd like to have as a standalone piece of content, because I think it's very important to get depth and sort of context on it, and to go somewhat a bit deeper than some of these other conversations. So I, full disclosure, was not in either of the sessions you just talked about where you addressed mental health as a sort of a headline subject. Ross, did you see?
Not here, but Scott's come into our peer group in Evolve before and talked on the topic, and it's always a very, time to just stop and remember that there's more to life than just running a business and making money and helping people with technology. There's a massive human element to what we all do, and Scott's spoken very well on it in the past.
Okay, and I think. Well, I won't speak to any of my experiences yet, other than to say I think everybody has got some experience. People are complex, and people are, there's because people are increasingly comfortable talking about it, and I will let you in a second actually talk about mental health and the journey you've had. And but it means that because people feel more comfortable coming forward, there is a greater awareness, which is very positive. But it also just shows the extent to which it's a problem, right? It's a real difficulty for a lot of people. So, Scott, I will stop talking. I will ask you if you can just maybe speak to the presentation you've given today, and what you would like us and the people watching this to kind of, I guess, take on board and come away with.
Yeah, and I think first of all, I'd lead off with how impressed I've been in the time that I've been here. This is my 8th trip to Australia, but just how positive and transparent and proactive the audiences have been towards the topic. And obviously, it varies person to person, but now I have the opportunity to compare the audience here to the audience in the U.S. And it's not that the U.S. is negative towards the topic at all. Sometimes we talk about Australia being, the differences in private equity relative to the States. And in this case, I would put Australia maybe even ahead of the curve when it comes to that topic. But
is it a vulnerability thing? Are we more open or something? Or
I think we could speak as well to the UK from that perspective, being more inward, conservative, etc. But I think you're very open. My wife lived here for 2 years,
okay,
and she tells me that as well. I mean, you have your mates. You're very direct. You're very friendly. You're very open with those sorts of things. And I'm saying those in generalities,
sure.
But that was my 3 days of, actually I was here all week. I spoke at the Evolve Community Day lunch on Tuesday, gave a presentation there. And then Nick Moran gave the presentation that just finished as part of IT Nation Sydney. Had a standing room only, bring in more chairs. So if you use that as a data point in terms of level of interest, we had people that really mattered. And we had everything from more the technical perspective to the owners and everywhere in between, because just as you pointed out, it's something that, if you ask the question, does anybody in the room know somebody who's struggled or is struggling with a mental health? Or sometimes that gets taken too broadly and someone thinks automatically schizophrenia or bipolar or PTSD.
Yeah.
Whereas if you broaden that out just in terms of the level of stress, everybody can relate to stress that they're under, that their family members are under, that their team is under. Those are mental health, mental wellness sorts of issues as well. So I can certainly talk more about what Nick and I covered, but that's my initial perspective. And based on the feedback, based on the number of people that came up and up and up over the course of the time that I've been here, thanking for the vulnerability, they would call it braveness. I call it just simply telling my story. It really lets one keep taking that next step forward. And there are people, the AI is a big topic here. Private equity is a big topic here. In some ways, neither one of those happens as fully and positively as it can without individuals who are really healthy mentally. So, it's just another area of, call it soft skills, or in some cases it's more emotional intelligence, just to know and ask and take the time. You have the great Are You OK program. Australia was where the mental health first aid program was created and brought to the U.S.
Okay.
So there are examples, concrete examples of Australia very being strong in those areas.
Yeah, I think It Ain't Weak to Speak as well is another one, right? And I think that actually resonated. I mean, the amount of friends I've got roughly my age who have come to me and said, I'm actually suffering with anxiety or depression and I'm now on medication, and that there's no shame in that, which has been really like a big shift.
Yeah. It's been certainly a lot. Yeah, as you said, people are maybe still finding it hard to start that conversation, but I certainly think once people have come to actually take some action on it, and people are a lot more comfortable now being able to talk about it. That first step still seems quite hard from what I see and what I'm experiencing, and I think certainly what I've seen is our sector is very male heavy in an age group where things like loneliness and is really prevalent. And the move to more and more working from home obviously has impacted over the last few years. So yeah, I'm certainly seeing this is not a, while there's a lot of good things happening, there's still a lot more we can all do.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah, I think there are really, when I kind of lay out when I do my more formal presentation, I break it down into 4 areas. And I say, obviously, there's the core. It's not something we talk about often. There's the stigma aspect that we can talk about how we manage that and get through that. And it can be there's some very simple tools, relatively speaking, to do with that. Number 2, pre-COVID and post-COVID, there was this challenge that we all had to face of managing teams and individuals in different ways in different places, hybrid, dealing with boundaries differently. Dealing with, we talk about artificial intelligence. I use a term that I heard that is artificial intimacy. And that really comes from far too many people that are working remotely or hybrid, where the intimacy comes from their experience with people all becomes so much around their cell phone, their screen, their computer screen, and their video game screen. And they just don't have the skills like we like to think that we had when we were in the office full-time working and interacting. Number 3, we talk about the financial pressures, and that can be inflation, that can be wage challenges, that can be partners and owners who are really pushing hard for that exit event, and the stress and impact that places on their teams. And then number 4, we talk a lot about those outside factors, and that can be the fact that somebody's 13-year-old daughter is being bullied on social media. That can be the isolation that you talked about. In the U.S., we have a Surgeon General who releases reports, and one that he released last year was the impact on isolation, or in many cases, lack of male mentoring is another issue. And the data is widely published around those that are socially isolated experience about the similar health effect as smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And you just can't imagine what that would be, but that's what it does to you if you don't have
eating away at your insides.
If you don't have that mate, or that, like to your point, so many men compared to women don't have that good friend or friends that they can lean on. And I think that maybe is one of those differences here, where I'm not saying it's ideal in Australia, but it seems to me while there can be that kind of that veneer that you have to break through a little bit to really be a friend. Exactly, which is another reason for the peer groups. That's such a big point.
For sure, especially as an owner when you don't have peers at work in the office. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So those are kind of the points that we talk about a lot.
I think having you up there, and Nick, I think is very similar. He's a very sort of emotional, vulnerable guy. I think having you guys set the scene that's fine, normalize that, like that's absolutely the right approach. I mean, not everyone can do it, but it's a good play. I think there has been a big shift. I grew up in New Zealand. I moved here when I was 20-ish. And I grew up playing a lot of rugby, and there was the whole suck it up, get over it, just walk it off or whatever. And there was also a big, everybody else has probably got it worse off, all these people worse off. So it's almost like I don't have it bad enough to complain. There's all that kind of pressure. But the biggest one, I think, is that a lot of people don't, and I certainly didn't, because I personally haven't suffered with anxiety or depression, but my wife has, and my family has. There's been suicide stuff in my family. I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't see it. And if you can't see it, it just doesn't seem like an illness. And my wife said to me, imagine if I had a broken arm right now, would you feel sorry for me? I was like, of course, I could see it. I could empathize with it. But when it's a deep, crushing anxiety, can't understand it, can't see it, it was really hard for me. It took me a long time to go, okay, I can empathize, I can feel sorry, So I think that's been a big difficulty for a lot of people who don't personally suffer with it. But
and then the next stage is you can see it, but don't know what to do about it. And I think that's
so
where
true.
you've come and talked to us a lot about, spotting the signs and then how to start those conversations and how to make a workplace a place where it encourages those conversations, I guess. Yeah.
Right. And when I was talking to Stu Applegate and Nick Moran before coming, they said, because we kind of said, well, do we want to throw a lot of statistics out there or throw a lot of, generalized approaches you can take? And we said, well, let's really try to just figure out how can we get people to take that first step? Because if they can do the first step, then we can give them a second step, as opposed to giving them 100 steps to take and choose one and create it more complex. And I think that was really the goal when I presented in the Evolve Community Day lunch. I kind of treated it as almost an Evolve meeting, and I said at any Evolve meeting you have to set goals. And the goal I had for the audience was everybody in the room would take and make one step towards themselves or someone they knew improving their mental health in the next 90 days when they come back for their next meeting. And people could digest that, but they still need to know what could that be. And we gave them a collection of options. And the one that I communicate, that I say is for most people can be very easy. Owner, typically starting at the owner, and has really next to zero cost, other than maybe a little bit of emotional cost, is in the U.S., and I think here as well, I saw heads nodding around this idea of, we're taught when we're young that if there's a fire in our home, we stop, drop, and roll. And I talk to people, kind of the analogy to that is to acknowledge, educate, and care. And my comparison to that is, Brendan, if I was fortunate enough to have you working for me, I could have a zero-cost conversation with you, and I would simply say, Brenda, we work in IT, and that's a stressful situation. We have customers calling, we have deadlines, timelines, we're trying to learn new things, we've got to make money, and I want to let you know that I know you know that that is a stressful environment. I also want to, now shifting to education, I want you to know that we have an EAP, or we have this app, or we have other elements that if you or your family members call this number, I don't even know, it's anonymous. Or we have these resources available to you, or we're going to have a speaker come in, or whatever the case is. So there's this educational component. But really the third component is the caring. And I want you to know that I care about you, I care about the rest of the team. And if you would come into my office, if you had any need, knock on the door, we'll talk about it. If you're not comfortable to me, you can go to HR, you could talk to your direct team leader, whatever it is. But those are those three steps, again, of acknowledging, educating, and care, that there is almost no cost to doing that. You can easily educate your team leaders to do that sort of thing. And the easy step to that, I've had a number of leaders, you both know, for example, Kevin Blake with TechMD, Rashad with Integris, etc., where you turn that into what amounts to a very simple CEO, managing director driven email to the organization. And you acknowledge to the organization that we work in a stressful environment. You let them know that you have the resources available, that self-care is a time that they need to take care of themselves. And if they need to see either the managing director, CEO, that's fine, or make sure that they reach out to a leader and they send that, and they might do it once a year just as a reminder. But that's something, just as a simple first step, starting point that is relatively easy to pursue.
Yeah.
How do you, if you're an actual person like that, that's great from an organizational standpoint, from sort of a, from the knowledge, education, care part. But if you're the individual and you've been given that sense that it's okay to speak up, that the organization, your manager, your leader, whatever cares, how hard is it to know that you actually have a problem that you need to address? Because none of us know what another person is experiencing or what they would label as a problematic thought or an illness or whatever. So how do you in the moment, and I think you've personally been through this, right? Is how do you know that you actually need help? Like, what's the trigger? Is there a tipping point? Is there a flag?
Yeah, that's a very, very difficult question. And my wife happens to be here. And if my wife was here, she would say that that's really one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest stressors for her, is that am I capable of self-assessing?
Yeah.
And in certain illnesses, I think that one can. It's like if I break my arm, I can probably
Yeah.
assess that there's severe pain.
This hurts a lot. Yeah.
However, if I have cancer, I can't assess that without probably going to the doctor and having it analyzed. So even there, outside of mental health, she would say it's a concern of hers that I have bipolar illness, and I've had bipolar illness for 30 years.
Okay.
And, I don't get my rewards, if you will, or I'm not motivated by, the bottom of a bottle and drinking. I'm not motivated by injecting, some form of drug or medication. I don't deal with PTSD. All of those are certainly real situations of, that can involve mental health issues. Mine is the, pursuit of big ideas, entrepreneurial big ideas. It's spending, it's traveling, it's doing those sorts of things. So it's crossing time zones even. So I've had to be really careful, make sure I get enough sleep and rest when I'm here. But back to your question, I think one of the biggest opportunities there really has to be for the individual to surround him or herself with others. And I'll take it from a business perspective. You have to benchmark. You have to, as we call, an Evolve program, you have to know what good looks like, to know what bad looks like. And you have to be able to say, if I'm a leader in an organization, I have to know who I'm leading well enough to know when something has changed.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. Yeah, if you know that there's slipping, there's a change in behavior. That's a really good call.
If I know you play rugby and you have a favorite band and you have this hobby, and I ask you about that 3 weeks from now, and you've pursued none of those, then that could be at least a yellow flag to me as to why that may be happening.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that was kind of leading on to my question, the next question, which was how can, whether it's from personal experience or more general, but how can everyone else help maybe, or at least what do you need from people around? Like how can you best get involved, or at least offer to get involved? Because that's the hard part. You can't insert yourself into a situation, but how do you approach a situation where you think maybe I need to broach that topic with someone?
Let me put you guys on the spot. If I'm at First Focus, how would anybody feel if they asked another employee, "Are you okay?" What would be the response?
Look, I'd hope that it's a question that is asked often and welcomed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't honestly say that everyone would feel comfortable answering that genuinely, but as an organisation, we can certainly make as comfortable space as possible to do that. But I would say that the answer to that's going to be wildly varying.
Yeah, team by team. That's the problem. I feel confident that in my team, I do actually have quite in-depth conversations around mental health with my team, but different people have different comfort levels, different. Yeah. So how do you template that? How do you create a standard of where that conversation, that question is both able to be asked in a way that engenders a response that's meaningful across a larger team?
And like you said, we have the AP, we have the app, we have the coaching sessions, and I would say utilization of that is okay, but I feel like we're often even having to remind people that it's there. So I think, as I said, I don't think it's we're certainly not done, or we're not there, or it's a constant reminder.
I think and I told this to the various peer groups. I mean, it's somewhat easy to go to a session here, and it becomes one of your to-dos that you take back to the office, as we're taught in the Evolve program. Don't go back to the office with 15 things to do and pile them on your leadership team or your managers and expect them to get done. Otherwise, they're not going to look forward to you going. But, if you look at that and, from the perspective of, I'd much rather, it's a recommendation I give, I'd much rather have a consistent, steady drumbeat of the importance of mental health in the culture than I would one all-hands meeting that was all about mental health, and then it went into the woods and was never surfaced again.
Yeah, especially with things like that's in some ways, not the downside, but that's what happens with it's Are You Okay Day. So that week, everyone talks about it, and then the next week, it's forgotten about for another 51 weeks.
Correct. Correct. And I had an Evolve service executive leader in the session that Nick and I just did, and there it becomes relatively straightforward because you have quarterly check-ins.
Yeah.
Whether it's a flip chart on the wall and somebody has to write their emotion or their stress level, or a facilitator can go around the room and really focus at that time. But I think that that email may go out once a year, like I talked about from the managing director. But even in things like one-on-ones, it becomes very easy to insert that question. And it may not always be people can, I assume, get worn out by being asked, "Are you okay?" But there are other ways to ask that question.
Yeah.
But then it can be brought up, by a leader of a team, or things like in the United States, we have these, in the break room, there are always federal government guidelines that have to be posted. And that's where we could post a nice flyer about the importance of mental health. And there are other places and other touch points to help shape behavior. In general, what's certainly true is adults much prefer to be reminded than told.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
the more we can have these touch points that we come across and we're reminded either by simple signage, an email here, a team meeting here, an email here, that we can start to build that culture. When the recommendations that I give, if there are, we have a lot of suggestions, and people can find these with AI. They can find them with Google. There's all kinds of top 10, top 20 lists of things to do for stress or for mental health. But I look at it in terms of, back to, again, the acknowledge, educate, and care, that everybody can do that. There's essentially zero cost to that from a leadership team. Number two is to improve their wellness programs. And a lot of that is to either strengthen their EAP or just strengthen the fact that people are aware of their EAP, or that can go deeper as well. Whether you have programs, there's, as I say, there's really no substitute from the mental health stress perspective to exercise. And far too people don't get enough exercise, don't get enough sleep, and don't have the diets that are really needed.
Right.
And yes, some of those could have costs, whether it's the gym or, maybe buying healthier food. But, whether it's what you have and just what you encourage. I've had members who have brought in a dietitian, from a local grocery chain to talk about, or someone who's a sleep specialist, or they've just found as a TED Talk on the importance of sleep. I know that a lot of the younger generation are struggling with finances, about how to buy a house, or do they have a will? And all MSPs have clients in that area. How about bringing them in virtually or face-to-face and doing an Ask Me Anything? Don't just bring your financial planner in the U.S. when it's time to analyze your 401k's performance, but bring them in and let people ask any question about that to try to reduce that stress load and showing the caring that you have. And then third, and everybody seems to grasp onto this, I'm old enough to remember Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right. Number one is to be proactive. And we can all relate quite simply to the idea that some of us, Brendan, maybe not, you're looking a little younger.
44, but yeah.
But I'll say Ross remembers a time when
shots fired.
when break fix was the business model.
Right,
and when things broke, we made money. And it was not bad when they broke. Yeah. And then we swung that to managed services when we didn't want things to break.
Yeah.
And we want to do the same thing with health.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay,
and obviously, people are well familiar with your health model is different, fortunately, than the U.S.'s health model. But nonetheless, the concept is the same. People get when you say, I don't want it to break. They're not going to walk into your office with red, yellow, and green blinky lights on their forehead, and you're going to say, aha, it's time to help this individual. You have to be proactive. You have to put these systems in place. The thing that I talk about in groups, like I did to the group I just spoke to, what would happen if the next phone call you received was from somebody in your office saying that there was a mental health crisis going on in your office with one of your employees? My guess is everybody in that room has some form of policy that they would follow if a customer's server went down, but very, very few of them have any form of policy in place they would follow, FAQ, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If an employee had an issue, or if they do, the answer is call HR. The reality is the majority of the owners in small and mid-sized businesses are HR, and they don't know what to do next.
Yeah.
It's a very fair call. I think a lot of what you're saying comes back to the pretty simple business mantra of repeat,
Yep.
right? Just when you think you're getting sick of saying it, they're starting to hear it for the first time, or at least it's being normalized, they're starting to believe it, maybe as part of it. And it's got me thinking maybe even just at roundtables, finished slide is just maybe a slightly different way of framing a point each time. I don't know, but it's interesting to think about what we could do with existing frameworks to kind of get that message out. But
Yeah.
all right, look, I think that's been a really helpful chat. I think it's a fantastic message to be throwing out there. I think it's really great of you to be so vulnerable and so proactive. Speaking about being proactive with the message you're coming out to the market with. So thanks for coming and talking to us, and thanks for what you're doing at the event.
You bet. Thank you
Thanks,
guys
Phil.
for hosting me and for helping get the message out.
Good, mate. All right, that's going to be thank you. That was a really great chat. And I think, yes, you want